So talking about math, one of the key components to really consider and look into, pay attention to, especially when you're talking about something that's Common Core based, I know I said it, sorry, is looking at the math domains. You are looking at kindergarten, because they have counting and cardinality, which is like, you know, understanding like the sequence of numbers. But with basically looking at first grade on, number and operations, algebra and algebraic thinking, measurement and data, and geometry. So all the content that students learn are basically going to fall into kind of those buckets. They might be reformulated in some way, but generally that's what you're going to get. So when we have an understanding of those domains, and then we begin to see how children are performing, let's say that a student is having issues with a certain part of math, right? A certain aspect, which is really like a lot of the basis for response to intervention plans, or even looking into going into specialized instruction or special education. Whenever there are goals that are aligned to academics, it's going to fall into one of those buckets when we're talking about math. So if there are issues with working with numbers using the 4 operations, right? Addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, then we're talking about number and operations, right? Understanding how numbers work together and how we apply the operation, addition, subtraction, regrouping or carrying the 1, right? Making a new 10, all that type of stuff, right? Base 10 number system, that's your number and operations. And then when we start talking about representations of quantities, right? Realizing that, I buy 7 shirts for $10 each. How much do I spend on the shirts? Then we're going into the algebra and algebraic thinking, right? More of that representation. And then once we get into a point of, well, how do we look at this bar graph, right? Or line plot, or whatever the case is, this table of data, right? We're talking about measurement and data, where we then employ using rulers, different types of tools to understand the world around us. Then thinking about shapes, right? Whether that be 2-dimensional shapes, basic stuff, squares, triangles, rectangles, whatever, and then their properties. And even going further, of course, when we get into working with older students and thinking about things like 3-dimensional figures, right? Prisms, pyramids, and looking at those things in nature as well and how they show up and appear, right? That's going to be talking about our geometry, and going, step further and bringing in, applicable situations like architecture. So you have those breakdowns, and it's important and imperative for us to know those things, because whenever it gets to a point where there's a struggle, especially with, students in their earlier years, and they're coming across certain concepts that they're just not really grasping, or the way that the information is being disseminated to them is not effective, then we have to look at it and say, well, what part of this is not really working? Where's this falling apart? And how can we address that particular concern at that point in time? Because again, we know if those smaller deficits are allowed to just kind of sit, then there's a potential that they become worse deficits. Breaking down those domains and making sure that we know and we can pinpoint, this is where this particular student is struggling. And on the flip side of that, this is where you're excelling. We don't have to weigh so heavily on this domain. Then we can navigate a little bit better, just to make sure that we meet the needs of that student. Because if they're struggling with number and operations and amazing in geometry, then of course we would focus on supporting in number and operations and building that capacity so that their comfort with that domain could meet where they are with geometry and have them ready for the next step and the next level. So just my thoughts. Hope this helps. Peace.